I'm Scott Lucas. This is today's EA Worldview on Syria. The CIA says the Syrian insurgency equals al-Qaeda. For months, we have noted how the label of al-Qaeda has been slapped on the Syrian conflict, how terms like extremist and jihadist distort, manipulate, obscure what is really happening inside the country, but how those labels have a power nonetheless, how they shape how different countries, how different groups respond to what is happening inside the country. Step up John Brennan, director of the CIA, who has just told a congressional committee that al-Qaeda has infiltrated the Syrian insurgency not only to carry out its own attacks against the Assad regime, but to train jihadists to carry out attacks against the United States, against Europe. That's right. For the CIA director, there is no longer a legitimate Syrian insurgency. Instead, those opposition fighters are being turned against London, Paris, Berlin, and Washington. It is the ultimate nightmare to come out of the so-called Arab Spring. At a practical level, we could ask Mr. Brennan, exactly what is your evidence, sir? Where are these terrorist cells that you're talking about? He, of course, would reply, that's classified information. I couldn't possibly reveal it. We, however, can look at what Mr. Brennan said on one count to expose, in fact, the propaganda behind the claim. Brennan said that a man named Ali Khalid al-Suri, a leading member of a faction called Ahrar al-Sham, was in fact al-Qaeda's trainers of the jihadists who were going to carry out 9/11 Part 2. Well, Ali Khalid al-Suri was not in Syria to carry out such a mission. What we know, because it's been established from multiple sources, is that he was there to mediate between a conflict between the Islamic State of Iraq and Sham and another Islamist faction, Jabhat al-Nusra. That's right. Al-Qaeda had mandated al-Suri to carry out a mission, but it was a mission to try to keep the insurgents from fighting each other and to try to keep them united against the Syrian regime. We can also look at something else that Mr. Brennan said in his testimony. He said that the Islamist faction Jabhat al-Nusra was behind the training of these terrorist cells. They are the ultimate mastermind. Well, that doesn't accord with anything else we've seen in this conflict. Yes, Jabhat al-Nusra is linked with al-Qaeda. Yes, they have pledged allegiance to al-Qaeda Central, if you want to call it that, in Pakistan. But Jabhat al-Nusra has made clear from the start of its intervention in the Syrian conflict that it is fighting over local issues. It is fighting against Assad. It is fighting, it claims, for its vision of the Syrian people. Now, you might not like Jabhat al-Nusra. You might not like their vision of Sharia law. You might question whether or not they would allow democracy if they took power. But Jabhat al-Nusra has not been focused on the United States or Europe or any type of international vision of terrorism. They have been fighting at home. The reality isn't what matters here, however. What Brennan did was a political move. What he effectively told Congress is, look, you can't trust the Syrian insurgency. You can't really believe that they might be fighting for democracy and rights and justice. You might just have to think that they're fighting for terror, that they might be anti-American rather than anti-Assad. So, why should we support them? That's right. What Brennan was doing was providing a story, a myth if you will, to justify the U.S. retreat from the insurgency. That retreat is not new, of course. The Americans have been pulling back from intervention for many months. For example, in their failure to respond to last August chemical weapons attacks by the Assad regime near Damascus. But what Brennan does is magnify the reasons for the retreat. The issue is no longer chemical weapons. It's no longer the barrel bombs that fall on Syrians across the country. It's not the tens of thousands of detainees who are held in Syrian prisons and the thousands who have died, probably from abuse and execution. No, the issue is, and only is, al-Qaeda. There's nothing else you have to consider here. So why don't we just all go home? And that indeed is what the United States might be doing, even as the Syrian conflict goes on. It is the use of extremism to cover not a fight against terrorism, but a retreat from any type of intervention in a conflict which continues to take more and more lives each day. I'm Scott Lucas. This is today's EA Worldview on Syria.